Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of KYB, the episode where we interview and we highlight builders from the Ethereum ecosystem. Today, we are joined here by some of the Gauntlet folks to discuss about Aera. We have Trevor, Holt, and Walter with us. Guys, hello, welcome. And please, before we begin, let's give a quick intro to each one of you guys, and so we know who we're talking with.
Awesome. I'll start. I'm Trevor. I'm the governance lead at Gauntlet. So I handle a lot of the delegations, stakeholder relations, that side of the business. I'm mostly here for context on the business side when it comes to DAOs. But yeah, stoked to be here with you guys.
I'm Holt. I'm product manager on Aera. Been with Gauntlet for about a year and a half, and just mainly been focused on taking this thing from an idea into actually getting DAO treasuries into the product and then expanding out to V3, which we'll talk about today.
Hey, I'm Walter. I joined Gauntlet just over a year ago. Came from, the buy side, quant research in TradFi, and really excited to, build strategies out in Aera. There's a lot of interesting things we can do.
Perfect. Okay, so let's quickly dive into what is Aera, right? And maybe it would make sense to also touch on what Gauntlet is, given that Aera is kind of like Gauntlet's product.
Yeah, for sure. I'll just start with what's Aera and maybe punt it off to someone else for the Gauntlet part. So what is Aera? Very basically, Aera is a smart contract that allows someone to deposit funds and then has the concept of a guardian, and that guardian is allowed to take actions on those funds on behalf of the depositor without actually having custodial access to those funds. And so basically we've built a bunch of guardrails in place where the guardian can't lose a certain amount of money per day or can't trade certain assets, or has to use certain DeFi protocols. So like what this might look like is, let's say we want to build out a stablecoin strategy. Basically that stablecoin strategy would have some guardrails in place to say, okay, you can only use USDC, USDT, and DAI, and you can only use Uniswap, and you can only use Aave, Compound, Morpho, and Pendle. And then the guardian then can only operate within those guardrails. So what that means is if they wanted to go and trade into ETH or trade into Doge or some other random asset, it'll actually just revert the trade. And then also they can only use those DEXs and lending protocols. So if they wanted to go and lend on some really sketchy DEX, it's not going to let them do that either. So it basically makes sure that the depositor knows exactly what can be done on their funds without having to take the risk of someone else managing it and then doing something that they didn't expect. And then on the Gauntlet side, I'll punt it over to Trevor or Walter if you guys want to take that.
Sure, yeah, I can take that. So Gauntlet has been around since 2018. We started off as risk optimization really at some of the earliest DeFi protocols, alongside a lot of the DeFi research that Tarun operated on. Made quite a name for himself in the space, and since then we've expanded quite a bit. Today we're really focused on data-driven strategies. We operate those through vaults, where we're curators. We're one of the largest curators on Morpho today, and then also through kind of our applied research side. So that includes everything from incentive optimization to risk management to strategic building of DeFi strategies, kind of across the board.
Okay, so it's akin to, well, not akin, but it's like more so like yield strategies rather than acting like a hedge fund or a trading firm. Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like Aera, from the sound of it, does look like, hey, how do I solve the problem of managing someone else's money and deploying those yield without that someone having to trust me necessarily? Is that kind of like how the logical iteration happened?
Yeah, exactly. So when this was originally being built out, Gauntlet's been around since 2018. We've been really involved with DAOs and working closely with people like Uniswap and Compound, and we've heard these requests of, we would like to have you guys being more active on our funds, and at the same time not give up custodial access to that. So that's been a problem, I think, in crypto as a whole for a while. Like, how do you make sure that, you know, when you're running these strategies, you don't have to like give someone custodial access to that, and then just solving that with smart contracts. I mean, it's really interesting when you look at TradFi versus DeFi, where this kind of stuff becomes possible. So yeah, it certainly came from having this direct connection with DAOs and working with them on different products, and then having to build a smart contract that actually enable that use case.
Yeah, I get that. I can imagine how difficult it must have been working with DAOs before Aera. Okay, and what are some like the challenges you faced building out the tool originally? Like, were it smart contracts limitation, were it, you know, liquidity problems, multi-chain, compatibility? What was the challenge you faced?
Yeah, I think there's probably three angles here. And so first one is just general strategy problems. Second one is the smart contract issues. And then third one would be like actually working with DAOs. So I'll pass it off to Walter for strategy focus, and then Trevor, I'll pass it to you for the DAO focus on that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I'm actually very passionate about this topic. When I joined Gauntlet, we were still working on Aera V2, which was, you know, second iteration of Aera, trying to expand its capabilities. And, you know, the world I come from, it's very easy to trade a broad range of assets. And one of the problems we encountered with Aera V2 is like, how do you set up a system such that you can quickly change what the Guardian is allowed to do, kind of expand that capability, communicate that, you know, through those constraints to, you know, the depositor, but also on top of that, build a system that is effectively, and, you know, we can get to that later, we're kind of bleeding into trade execution infrastructure, capital management, portfolio management, off-chain. That's like what our system looks like off-chain. For Aera V3, the way it works now is very elegant, basically. Like, the limitation of how do we define what our constraints are has been simplified into kind of a hook system where we can just define, you know, this is the asset I want to trade on this venue, and we kind of take all of these hooks and package them together into a Merkle tree. And, you know, without getting too technical, it's just basically like a proof of here's what the Guardian is allowed to do, and we submit a proof every time with every action that this is a thing we are allowed to do. And that was kind of the hardest part about strategy development in the old world. And to be honest, it exists with all, let's say, most of these vault infrastructure platforms. Like, how do you set up this constraint system? I think with Aera V3, that problem is like as close to solved as it's going to get right now, and it allows us to do some very, very elegant things about strategy. So like with each strategy, we basically like each strategy comes with its set of hooks, and then we can say like, this is what the strategy can do, and the depositor signs off on that, and then our system just picks that up and just acts on these new things it's allowed to do.
Okay, so strategy theoretically can evolve over time, and so will the Guardian's permissions, without requiring too much back and forth with the depositor.
Exactly. Yeah.
That sounds dope. And Trevor, what about DAO constraints and challenges?
Yeah, I think, you know, DAOs are kind of like the final boss of any BD person in the space. It's extremely difficult in a lot of cases to work with DAOs. I think that's for a few reasons. One is, you know, kind of open business negotiations that I think normally we talk about race to the bottom in like financial terms, but in a DAO, it tends to become like organizational terms where everything just completely degrades as soon as one person goes on a forum. And it can be a really hard labor intensive process, right? To actually sell kind of a more management custom style product, right? So I think that's one area from like Aera V2 that we learned, that providing a much more specific kind of productized offering for yield is really interesting about Aera V3. And so I think we've kind of like adjusted our approach there. The other side of it is really multiple counterparties having to sell to 40 different delegates, having to sell to, a number of stakeholders with different opinions is very difficult. And I think streamlining that process as well on the product side will help there, right? Where we have a very, very clear, super optimized, very effective, and what we hope is like a best in market product to be able to bring to the table. So yeah, I think that's kind of the downside without getting too into the weeds on some of the specific issues.
Yeah, I'll expand a little bit on the strategy side too of what we're running into with DAOs, and so and also good segue to why we've built V3. Really, most DAOs have very custom things that they want, and so it can be very difficult to build a strategy that is applicable across customers. And so what that ends up being for us when we're building out strategies is every single customer that we've dealt with, every single DAO has a different set of strategies. And that's a ton of operational overhead, and us having to build infrastructure around that can be very slow. And so, yeah, moving into V3, we've got basically we've gone from conceptually single depositor vaults into multi-depositor vaults. By doing that, we enable multiple DAOs or any customers really to be able to deposit into these vaults without having to build a custom strategy every single time. So when you're thinking about DAOs and how they work, a lot of them do have specific criteria they want, and that customization can be difficult. So we're definitely battling that and trying to solve for that as well.
And how do you actually come up with those strategies for the DAOs? Because one of the issues that I've seen when dealing, from the DAO side with treasury managers is who gets to decide, who gets to, you can't vote on the overall strategies every now and then. So what are the best practices in working with the DAOs on those strategies? Who creates them? Who manages them? Who gets to, make the call?
Yeah, I think historically we've had the most success working with programs that have kind of already received some level of ratification, right? So a good example of this would be over at Morpho. We knew the Morpho team was looking for a protocol and liquidity solution to support their token launch. They wanted on-chain liquidity, right, when they turned on the tradability of their token or transferability. So we were able to come in and say, look, we have a perfect solution for this. We talked with the stakeholders. There was wide consensus, and that was relatively straightforward. I think another good example is right now Uniswap is running all of their incentive infrastructure on Aera. So this is kind of one of these more custom builds that Holt was talking about, where essentially we plugged Merkle into an Aera vault so we could pass through and manage the operations via Aera. On the other side of that, some of the more tricky ones are I think the Arbitrum DAO treasury management, right? Where there's been multiple proposals, kind of almost a year-long process now. And we finally passed. There was some consensus in the DAO, and Gauntlet and Aera were one of the selected service providers. And now it's been a few months since that proposal even passed, and we haven't seen operationally the deposit take place because of kind of DAO operational issues, right? So there's kind of a range there. But yeah, broadly speaking, I think it's easier to bring a defined solution to the table when you kind of have broad consensus on the objective, rather than coming in and saying we can do whatever. What would you like? Because then it just becomes very, very hard to reach consensus.
So to follow up on that, who do you talk to in the DAO? Do you talk get that? And what works? What
Chris,
doesn't?
you're cutting off. Christopher, you're cutting off there. So
yeah, sorry. I'm in harsh from business right now. So my question, who do you talk to within the DAO? Do you talk with delegates? Do you talk with foundations? Do you talk with DAOs? And what works best and what doesn't? What is your experiences from that?
Yeah, I think it's always good to have a strong counterparty, right? So if we can work with a foundation or kind of a lead delegate who has a strong thesis on the strategy for the organization and the objectives, that's always going to be a cleaner path. I think, depending on the DAOs come in a million shades right now. It kind of requires like a custom strategy for each, right? And so as the governance lead, like that's kind of my job to help navigate when we see like there's a need for a service, what the best path is. If Gauntlet and Aera are a good fit, and if so, what's the best path to try and make sure that happens.
Okay, and we've spoken a little bit about strategies, a little bit about Gauntlet, a little bit about Aera, but I think it would be now a great time to actually see what Aera looks like. So how about someone shares their screen and walk us through what the Aera app actually looks like?
Yeah, I can pick this up, and actually I'm going to go through two things. So I'll first go through just showing you guys, generally the Aera app, and then some of the strategies that are being run on top of this. And then we can talk a little bit about Aera v3 and just take a look, basically how we're morphing this product into something new. So just kicking it off with Aera v2. Please let me know if you are not seeing my screen. Just pulling up the compound reserves. And so compound is a very simple objective. Compound's goal is to basically get yield on USD that they have. And also I think there's a little bit of ETH in here, but mostly it's in USD. And so Compound basically sat with us and they're like, hey, we've got all these funds, they're on chain. We want to be able to go after that. And so what we're then doing in the background is doing very simple things like deploying the vault, building the hooks around this, making sure that this customer is able to deposit in the vault and they know they're not going to get rugged. We can only deposit in Compound, we can only trade USD, we can only trade ETH and wrap staked ETH and things like that. So this is a very simple way for them to use this vault infrastructure, so they can just connect their wallet and then deposit into this vault. It's only available for the actual owner of the vault, so no one else can even come in here and deposit. And basically in this vault, we're doing very simple things. So we're actually just supplying into Compound and using USDC and ETH, and then you can just track the yield on these different supply assets that we're using. And then on top of that, we have a system built out to where we can auto compound some of these assets. So, if we're receiving rewards, if we're receiving any sort of incentives on top of the yield that we're getting from like a lending protocol in this instance, you would then be able to see that rebalancing happen and then auto compound into those like base assets of USDC or ETH. So this is a simple use case in Compound on our vault today. Most of this setup is happening with someone like Walter and I. And so they come to us, they have this idea, they want to use the Aera vault, and we'll sit down with them and understand their objectives and then be able to create a vault that actually goes out and executes against those objectives. And so this is Aera v2 today. And I'm actually going to shift over to Aera v3 so we can talk through this as well. And so, Aera v3, this is brand new and fresh. As of today, this is actually not public, but by the time this video out, it probably will be public. So we're actually going live on June 23rd with this. But essentially, we have this this stablecoin vault. So this is a very similar objective function as the Compound Reserves vault, right? Like you have USDC, you want to get yield on that. We'll be coming later on with additional strategies. The USDC is the first one, but you can imagine similarly things like USD. We call this alpha. You can imagine a low risk version, a high risk version of this where you're seeking higher and lower yield. And you can also imagine a world where we have ETH, BTC, and then potentially even other strategies on RWAs and other assets if those are interesting for our customers. So very simply with this, all you have to do is just supply into the vault. And so you would just connect your wallet and go through this process as one might expect. Get this open so I can do that. Cool, so once you're in here, you're just going to go ahead and put in the amount that you want, supply that in, takes about an hour right now to get this in the vault. It basically allows you to exchange USDC for shares of the vault. And then we start actually rebalancing this. So basically what that would look like, if you want to go to the allocations table, you can see exactly what assets we're in at any time. And you can also see what chain those are on. So this base strategy that we have right now, it's going after Base and Ethereum, and it's going after basically a group of Morpho vaults that we feel comfortable putting funds into. So very similar to, again, the compound strategy, like they're seeking yield, they wanted to use compound. This strategy is going after Morpho, different curators on Morpho. It's not just Gauntlet. We actually use Stakehouse and other curators as well. And then we're seeking the top yield based on risk-adjusted yield that we see in those vaults. And we have a lot of logic built on top of that to rebalance at certain times. So we can, do the same sorts of things where we understand, like, hey, here's the risk on this vault, here's the underlying assets, here's how much exposure we have to it. And then also rebalancing rewards into that, so it's auto compounding. So yeah, very simply, this is the first of many strategies we have coming. These will be available to anyone, including DAOs. And yeah, I guess, do you guys have any questions? And I'll allow Walter to expand on the strategy a little bit if you guys don't.
One question so far, which I think is like a pretty straightforward one, but the vaults are like custom made, let's say, or not custom made, but they are made for a single depositor, right? So if I'm a depositor, like a DAO, a foundation, whatever, and I come and want to use Aera, you'll create the vault, and I'm the only one who can deposit to that vault, right?
Yep, that's correct. So on the Aera side of things, these are single depositor vaults. So you can imagine a world where, you guys have a DeFi protocol, you have a native token, and you want to use Aera. You would just come to us and then ask, and then we set that up. So it's a bit more permissioned, if you will. It's not like you can just come here and actually set up a vault. You would need to sit with us, understand your strategies. Again, there's a lot of customization with this version of Aera, where we're not in a place where we can, just very quickly onboard you, like hand off, you guys just do your thing. It would have to be we sit and understand your use case. So yeah, that's in the world of Aera v2. In Aera v3, these will be open to the public, and so they're more defined strategies, and these just anyone can deposit into. And we expect these to be our highest yielding strategies versus custom strategies that are built outside of this. So
Okay, got it.
I would say there's like two ways of looking at this. So Aera is vault infrastructure. We can use that, for anything. Honestly, to me, I would take a step back even further and say it's actually just an on-chain entity through which you manage assets. We have in Aera v2, we had vaults through which we were paying funds out. We're going to have vaults through which funds are being paid into. It's just an entity through which assets flow. Now, on this vault infrastructure, we have partner vaults. So, protocol DAO comes to us and says they want to either run a specific strategy, they want to run payments out of this, they want to execute out of their token, they want to do something within this vault. And we have some partners who will wrap that vault then in a multi-depositor structure. In the V2 world, that's how that worked. What Holt just showed you with US Dollar Alpha is the first Gauntlet vault where we have decided what the strategy will be and offering that as a product. So far it's been in partnership with other protocols or doing things for specific DAOs. This is the first Gauntlet originated strategy, and we'll have more of those, but in Aera v3 we'll also still do partnership vaults.
All right. So let's continue with, I want to get back to the DAO side, but more so also stay on Aera a little bit. And my question is, right now or in the past also, have you worked with a DAO to manage its funds or a portion of its treasury through Aera? And what was that experience like? Do you have? Which I think you have.
Yeah, for sure. So I talked about a couple of them earlier. POL management for Morpho and Seamless is something that we've done, which has been kind of, I'd say, an active kind of dual objective treasury management style, right? Where you're both, potentially looking to earn yield, but you're also trying to create depth of liquidity for your governance token, right? So that's one thing we've done. The other thing is like Compound. We've managed a large amount of capital across a few proposals, I believe, through Aera for different initiatives as well, right? And I think that has worked pretty well. The support has been strong depending on the DAO for like an appetite for this sort of thing. One thing I think that's been really interesting has been kind of like sub DAOs and sub programs looking for some yield on their assets, right? So that's something we've done in Compound. Another example of kind of a sub DAO utilizing this is the ADPC and the ARDC and Arbitrum. They both used Aera for conversion, right? So we put together a strategy that utilized on-chain liquidity on Arbitrum and essentially priced out of ARB and converted to stables for that program to handle its operations. And we think that's a pretty elegant solution. Some DAOs are less interested. They want the foundations to kind of manage conversion, or they have their own kind of strategies for legal or operational reasons. But ideally, in the long term, I think that's really like a strong kind of good example of how operationally Aera can plug in. I think, now that as Walter just explained, we've kind of migrated from custom strategies to Gauntlet kind of stamped strategies that we've created. It's going to make it much easier for us to provide value, I think, in a really streamlined way, right? So no matter who your treasury manager is, no matter how much like control, if you don't want kind of like a Guardian custom vault with new strategies, you can basically say, all right, we'll handle our conversion, or our treasury management will manage like how we want our assets overseen, but you can actually plug your stables into that vault they just showed, right? So it creates kind of like this dual value proposition. Depending on where the DAO's at, we can kind of meet them at their comfort level and needs.
So I would like to follow up on that. I hope you can hear me well. So if I understand correctly, the V3 is kind of like a treasury management out of the box for laymen. So if I understand correctly, this is something that if I've got some money that just is there to sit for some time, for example, I know any program from the DAO and sub DAO, as you mentioned, we can just like select a strategy from Gauntlet, put it there, and it will do the thing already. Like I don't have to get into a relationship with a treasury manager to actually manage those funds. It's simply out of the box. Is it the right way to interpret it? Like, who is the customer for Aera V3?
Yeah, I mean, the customer is anyone who wants to earn yield on USDC, I think. And Holt, you unmuted, so feel free to jump in.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so just to give you kind of a like view into our way of thinking about this. So I think Gauntlet has a really strong history with B2B customers. That's been our business basically since we started, right? We see this product very much fitting into that, and also fitting into other participants. So we have something that we've, I think, coined. I don't know if it's used broadly, but maybe it'll start after this. Prosumers, where you can imagine people that are a bit more sophisticated, and they want to understand where they're putting their money. Maybe they have something over $1 million, up to 10 million. They're not a proper like hedge fund or or asset manager, but they want to have some structured investments, and they don't want to just be aping into any old vault or strategy or do it all themselves. So we see sort of like a couple of different segments. One of those is like retail prosumer whales, where we can be a bit more hands-on with them, help them understand what we're doing, help them understand how the strategy works and how the risk is managed. And then, of course, going after DAO treasuries is always something that we'll continue to do because we're so close with so many different ones. And then also, we're even looking into institutional type customers. So that may work for this particular vault where, we have a very solid USD strategy that we're building. And, there's institutions interested in coming on chain. We have higher yield than you can get potentially off chain. And so it starts to look appetizing for people that maybe traditionally haven't been on chain. And then beyond that, the customer for Aera as a whole, not just the Gauntlet USD strategy, are ecosystem type partners, TradFi type partners that maybe have a strategy they want to build and they need help from someone like Gauntlet to understand, like, how do we manage risk? How do we rebalance these assets? And that's something that Aera enables. And then like the quants at Gauntlet are then sitting down with them, understanding their use case, and then actually building out that strategy. And a great example of this that we've done, we've actually used Aera V2 for this, although V3 makes this substantially easier. We recently launched a vault that's an RWA strategy, levered RWA strategy with Apollo and Securitize. And so we see more of those types of customers coming to us that have, you know, maybe they have their own RWAs, maybe they have their own stable coin, and they want to offer their customers a way to easily run a strategy and get additional yield out of that asset. You know, I could see a world where, and like, I don't want to name names here, but like Falcon or Syrup or other like on-chain USD focused yield products could use something like Aera in order to further boost the yield that's available to their customers. So yeah, we're like, we have multiple ways we can go after people. And I think when we were talking about like our USD strategy, we really see that as consumers, DAOs, institutions, and then we have this whole other Vault infrastructure product where we can just build custom strategies for people that need these like public facing yield strategies for the ecosystem.
So I've got two questions here. So first one, is it like, if I'm a quant and you said a lot of the times that, you know, I can come to you and you will create me a strategy. What if I have a strategy? Can I bring my strategy to Aera Vaults? And, you know, if I'm a quant, can I use your product to provide my strategies to customers?
Walter, you want to take this one?
Yeah, sounds good. Honestly, it's come in all different shapes. Like we've had people come to us and say, I just want the Aera Vault to do this specific thing, and then we can just go do that for that customer. But we've also had people come to us with more nebulous goals and saying, hey, like I want to manage liquidity, like how should I do this? And then we can come up with, you know, what that, you know, quantitatively would look like. How does the strategy act? What are your constraints? And then we can implement that in, you know, the vault for this customer. So it's come in all different shapes. I think it's more often than not been on the more nebulous side. And I think we've just kind of taken it a step further and said, okay, removing all customer constraints, here's what we think is best. And that is what US dollar alpha vault is going to be.
Okay, so here comes another question, because this all seems like, you know, it's easy to use Aera as, you know, if I only have the money that I would not want to generate some yield, I could use it to simply generate better yield than like out of the box with any single product. It seems like a perfect fit for all the like traditional companies that do not have this access right now. Even, you know, even a company that is like a web shop or gaming studio that has some reserves for salaries, for, you know, expenses. It's not huge. It's not like in tens of millions of dollars. It's rather, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars. So normally in traditional financial system, these things are simply unavailable for them, or like the cost is too big, and they are just keeping this money usually on their bank accounts until, you know, they have to use it. Are you targeting such companies, and are you targeting such customers for, you know, because they could use Aera Vaults, like simply putting the money there, let it grow, and, you know, use it when it's ready?
I can let Holt talk about, you know, the product plan, but I'll give you my very personal opinion on this. And I alluded to this earlier by calling this just a financial entity that is on chain. Personally, I think Aera Vaults could be deployed for every single company. And it is like they're, you know, when you create a corporate structure, you have companies in different regions of the world and they do specific things. They're for, you know, this sub entity here and the sub entity there. I honestly see companies having Aera Vaults on different chains that manage, as you described, payments or growing their assets or receiving payments and also paying things out. Like there's really, we're using this right now. There's this very, Dyson, the guy who created the vacuum, when he created the vacuum, he could also use it to dry his laundry. And he never mentioned that to anyone because he said it just confuses the product. Aera vaults can do so much more than what we actually say, but we don't say it because we don't want to confuse people. Like right now, we're just using it for yield strategies, but actually the scope of what you can do is so much broader than that. And since you mentioned it, I, think it's important to say, like, I personally think everyone will have an Aera vault. Every entity could have an Aera vault on chain, but I don't think that's, in the immediate future.
Okay, I want to take a small step back from the strategies and the financial side of Aera and look at it more from like a builder's perspective, right? To us, it's a product built on the blockchain that can be utilized regardless of which chain or chains it's built on. It's still kind of like a project from the perspective of this podcast, let's say. So I want to ask you, wearing your builder's hat and not your financial strategist hat, what are some of the things that are needed by builders and are often overlooked in these different ecosystems? And that also, mostly asking from like the DAO side. Trevor, I know you have way more experience on those, DAO programs and initiatives. You've seen a lot that theoretically are there to help builders. But I'm curious, from a builder's perspective, are those enough? Are there things missing and those ecosystems could do better? What are some things that those ecosystems could help more with?
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear Holt's take on kind of like if there's technical holes in the product side, deployment, resources that could kind of streamline operationally how quickly we can like integrate and deploy on probably like longer tail chains that are just kicking off. But I think from the kind of builder side, one thing that is really important in my opinion is kind of just utilizing capital. A lot of the DAO structures and foundation teams I think are kind of afraid to like use their own chain, and this is something I've harped on before, but they really want to stick to like their TradFi rails, right? They're not interested in really like taking risks, at least that I've seen, as much as I'd like to see. So I think whether it's, conversion and using on-chain liquidity or not holding treasuries on the back end on the foundation account, but chasing yield on-chain, dog fooding their own ecosystems, and using their capital to do it is something that just makes a ton of sense to me. And I think that's really important. I think sometimes you hear narratives like, oh, this foundation has like 10 million of TVL on their chain, like it's not real TVL. I don't know. I think it's cool that they're using their own chain, right? I think being able to be a partner and help the builders understand what the use cases that they have and the needs that they have and how to convert those operational pieces on chain is like extremely valuable because they're real customers, right? They're real entities. They're very kind of symbolic of exactly what Walter was talking about, the many companies that will exist that I think will eventually all move on chain as kind of the blockchain industry progresses.
Okay, but that's it, kind of like, especially from the foundation side, it's something that theoretically those ecosystems can ask the foundation to do or suggest more strongly that they do. But do you think there's any sort of initiatives or programs or I don't know, any sort of things that DAOs could do to help projects and builders?
Yeah, I think pass more programs. I mean, like, look, I think DAO treasury management is an extremely contentious topic for a lot of the reasons I touched on previously. I think being a little more risk on, a little more grown up about managing capital from the DAO perspective is something that like really has been kind of discouraging to watch from the delegate side, right? Like there's a lot of friction there. There's not a lot of consensus from different stakeholders, and maybe that's on the part of folks like Gauntlet and Aera and some of the more financially minded builders in the space to do more education and kind of paint a clear picture of what that is. But yeah, I think that is super important. And even if it's just like I said, like capital to put in or incentives to help bootstrap flywheels, like all the way down the stack, I think that's something we've seen done at extremes, where either it's like this huge program or it's like nothing at all.
Okay, but
I've got a question to this.
Christopher, before you ask
Yep.
your question, I have another question I want to ask, especially for like the more risk-on type of approach from DAOs. Like typically those kinds of strategies, but at least the ones you've mentioned so far or showed that the demo, let's say, are centered mostly, from my understanding, for around like stable, right? But a lot of those DAOs have their treasury denominated in their native token. Are there ways to utilize, which I think like it's extremely hard, right? Yield for native tokens on each chain, like the opportunities that exist are very few, and building a strategy that can scale and actually deploy a lot of capital, I assume probably you know more than I do on that, but I think it's way more hard than just deploying stables. Do you think that this has something to do with it? Like whether if there were more strategies in the native tokens of those ecosystems, do you think delegates would be more accepting of deploying that capital versus trying to, because if you want to manage, let's say, $1 billion treasury and you want to deploy 200 million of that for yield, and you want to first convert to stables, that's $200 million of sell pressure for the token, theoretically. So are there ways, like, are there workarounds around it?
Yeah, I think Holt can maybe jump into this too, but I think it really depends on like the tokenomics of a given project, right? So there's some like, if there's native yield, like something like in alt L1, like near, for example, where there's kind of like staking infrastructure, like that becomes much easier to create kind of a levered staking solution on top of that. For another token that's just a governance token with no utility and just kind of a promise of revenue staking down the road, it's a little trickier. I do think off the bat, like Morpho, the POL strategy we ran with Morpho is a really good example of a way to kind of bootstrap financial products just based off of on-chain liquidity, right? Like I think it makes total sense for every DAO to have some amount of POL for their native token. And that helps bootstrap lending markets, that helps bootstrap, perpetual, kind of all these derivative products that you could have on those tokens. But Holt, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring Walter in here because Walter probably has the most experience with exiting a governance token. So
Yeah. So what you'd highlighted is obviously the problem with all of this. You have governance token. What do? Do you, how do you generate yield in the governance token? And if you can't, you have to convert it to something else. Now, what do you want to do if you want to keep it in the governance token? What we have been doing so far is doing what we've been calling protocol owned liquidity. Short, that's what POL stands for. And I think the most kind of successful example of this is really what we were doing with Morpho, where we were, they came to us and they said, hey, Morpho token is becoming transferable. How can we bootstrap liquidity on chain? At the same time, there was going to be market makers on centralized exchanges. We came up with a strategy to do the POL where you're not actually selling out of Morpho. Obviously, you're just providing two-sided liquidity, and that generated yield for them, and also boosted the liquidity on Base and Ethereum, and it was kind of like a win-win all around. But besides POL, like what else can you do? Well, the only other option really is lending your token. Like, truthfully, the only reason why other people might be borrowing it is mostly probably also to sell it. So you're kind of like faced with, I think it comes back to what Trevor said, you have to think about the tokenomics of the token itself. Like there's very little we can do on the strategy development side to, improve the yield of the native token. You have to think about the system endogenously. Like how does the velocity of the token work in the system? So yeah, I don't know if that answers your questions, but I think those are like the main two paths really to, using your native token without selling out of it.
Yeah, I like, at least conceptual, I really like the idea of protocol-owned liquidity. And I'm not sure why more DAOs are not doing this. Like, you have the native token already. A lot of them also accrue fees from sequencing ETH. So you kind of already have the funds to do it without even needing to apply sell pressure to the token itself. Would Aera be able to do like protocol-owned liquidity, from what I understand?
Yeah. So, yeah, Trevor, you can get. Oh, yeah, I'll take it. So, yeah, in the past we have done lots of protocol and liquidity types of models. I think I don't even know how many we have, but multiple DAOs have done that with us. Programs are fairly successful, actually. I think the Morpho program was probably the most successful because we started with them basically from launch day on. To do protocol and liquidity. So it's really good to kind of go live with them and see how that actually played out in practice. And their token has been like, I don't want to say up only, but it's been very successful. And so I think that just goes to show like doing that rather than dumping your token as a means to access some liquidity and generate yield on your token is a much better way. Because, if you look at some projects that on the other hand have decided to dump their token, like we've seen it firsthand, it definitely depresses the price. And so if you're trying to keep the price up, trying to keep your community happy, it's tough. The DAOs are in a position where they have to make a decision one way or the other. But I do think if protocol and liquidity is the way that you're willing to go, especially early on, I think you can have a lot of success just with doing that. And not to discount Morpho's project too. Like they've just been so successful with getting TVL. So I think that also helps. In Aera V3, we're actually a little bit less focused on this use case. So V3 is much more focused on replicable yield strategies. And not to say in the future that we wouldn't go back to having more of those custom vaults or having a way for people to onboard themselves into a strategy like that. But for our first version, we're focused much more on those like core ETH, USDC, BTC yield strategies, and just having that as an option for DAOs to onboard into.
Okay, and Christopher, you had a question earlier.
Yeah. So my question is, how does the ecosystem, because utilizing the DAO's own treasury is one thing, how the DAO can interact with you, but the treasury is just one, but each ecosystem has like 100 builders in this ecosystem. How can the ecosystems help you get into touch with builders? How can they build on top of you? How can they interact with you? Like, how can this flywheel be activated?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Holt can probably, and Walter can probably talk to this more, but we're very open to exploring new strategies. And as Aera V3 continues to grow, we're going to be looking to integrate with a lot of other DeFi protocols. I think, if I was the head of an ecosystem right now and I wanted to work with Aera, I'd be thinking about what kind of unique asset primitives do you have? Where are your big bets kind of on your chain, and how can you create more sophisticated strategies with Aera V3? And making those connections, having those conversations and building those partnerships and relationships, much like Holt was talking about with the levered RWA Apollo partnership. We're very, partnership minded in that sense, where we want to be working with kind of the best builders in the space. The Morpho team is another great example, to enhance and add on strategies on top of what they're building, to create something really unique. And that's a big differentiator for kind of each chain and protocol and team.
Yeah, I'll sort of add on to that. I have some thoughts. I mean, it really is like, for us, it's a bit of a TVL game. We're going after TVL. We want to be one of the largest vault infrastructure providers in the space. And so, for other builders, like think big on your chain. Like, where does the TVL gravitate to? Are there certain protocols? Are there certain strategies? Can you identify something that people are doing, like looping manually on chain or doing on chain, where we could potentially replicate that strategy and offer it, more broadly? Those are the sorts of things that we want to go after if we're going towards the custom ecosystem approach. We definitely want to do that. There's a ton of opportunity. I've already been having these conversations with some others, just sort of exploring what people are doing on their chain. And there could even be, I would say, more basic use cases that people just haven't really considered. Something like having a USD vault as like a, imagine you're, Ethereum, and you want to have your own USD vault that's like sort of like an Ethereum, I want to say sponsored, but like sponsored by Ethereum USD vault. We can become the vault infrastructure for something like that. And so you could imagine across all chains, there's probably many different ways that could go. And, just getting yield through lending is like just the beginning of where we can go with this. So, if there's unique strategies we can build on top of perp exchanges or other ways we can access yield, like we're open to getting creative. And so, I would just encourage, if you have places where TVL is gravitating, that's the kinds of things that we want to help out with and really start to bolster with you. So.
All right, we are almost at the top of the hour, so I want to start wrapping this up. So you have the upcoming IRV3 coming out on 23 of June. So I'm wondering, apart from that, what is like next for Aera, either on a high level, strategy wise, or on the product side?
Yeah, I'll just kind of touch on everything I see, and then I would love, like, Walter, if you want to expand a little bit on the strategy focus. But really what we want to do is build two core things. We want to have yield strategies that work for everyone in the space. So that's going to be very simple things like USD yield, Bitcoin, ETH. I know I've mentioned that, but I think those are really core to all ecosystems right now. And then having different risk profiles of those. So, there could be DAOs or anyone that wants to go after higher yield and is willing to take on a little bit more risk for that. Those are the sorts of things that we want to be focused on. So we'll be going after, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, like we could be doing different yield sources. So we have a lot on our mind about how we're going to expand where we're getting yield from and start to really outperform anyone else that's providing yield right now. Like Morpho is just scratching the surface on what we can do with this thing. So we're expecting that this is really going to expand in as far as like what we're getting yield from, and then the actual APYs that we're hitting. And beyond that, we really want to focus on the vault infrastructure side and expanding people's access to this. And so that could look something like being able to self-onboard, being able to like come up with your own strategies and actually implement it, being able to, bring in new protocols and integrate them yourself. There's a lot of ways we can go with this, where we can make the infrastructure very much like a trustless onboarding. And it's definitely a big undertaking to get there, but I think that's how Aera becomes, not just like something that Gauntlet uses and we're running strategies on top of, but all of DeFi can start to leverage as infrastructure and then really build around and make their own strategies and have their own vaults. So that's sort of the dream. Like we're going to have very much a Gauntlet focus on the strategies, and then Aera focus will be very trustless, like anyone can onboard, build their own strategy and vault type thing. So yeah, Walter, I would love for you to also expand on, Gauntlet strategies and where we're headed with that.
Yeah, just to echo what Holt said, like there's multiple dimensions this can go in, on the Aera side, as you described, different use cases, permissionlessness, but my focus is entirely on the Gauntlet US dollar alpha vault. And I think that's, to me, given my background in markets, what's most interesting. Like he said, Morpho vaults, it's just the tip of the iceberg. Like we are working on integrating everything has been built to basically as a portfolio management system and to integrate new chains and assets quickly. And so we're going to be expanding into fixed rate assets. We'll be doing, there's some very neat things we can do. Like, we're effectively getting an on-chain yield curve now, and we can trade that yield curve. And that's where I think people will then suddenly see, oh, and by people, I mean, actually the institutions, the TradFi institutions will see, whoa, actually there are now spot markets with a yield curve, and we can trade that curve. And that becomes a very, very attractive strategy, I think, because the yield markets on chain are very inefficient in my view. So that's what I'm most excited about, just the expansion of assets across different chains in the USR Alpha strategy.
Okay, and firstly, excited for you guys and for the launch. Looking forward to see out there and the buzz we can generate as well from this episode. And hopefully we can, we like to have this idea with Christoph of circling back with the project we talked to, in 3 months from now, 6 months from now, or a year from now, or whatever, and see how things have fared out for them so far. So really excited for the idea of getting to chat again in the future for another episode and see how things have played out, especially with the V3. Hopefully working with DAOs has gotten at least a bit easier by then. So Trevor has no more complaints. But yeah, well, it's been a pleasure having you guys on the podcast. I'm not sure if there's any final questions from Christoph or if there's any remarks that you guys want to bring up before we wrap things up.
Just thank you for having us. It's nice to talk to you about, what we've been working on.
Yeah, it's been a blast. Well, thanks guys for being here. Thank you, Holt. Thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Walter. I've been Sinkus here with Christoph from LTB, and till the next one, take care.
See you guys. Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.